Alright, so in this new episode, we've been delayed a little bit. The weather is turning. It doesn't look like it at the moment, but in a few days, some significant rain's going to develop, and it's going to keep raining all the way through when we had scheduled to do the smelt. But it's actually a gift in disguise, because we get to talk about any repairs that might need to be done before you start firing your kiln. It's a thing that if you're using natural earthen products, traditional products like clay and whatnot, like we're doing here, you're just going to run into working with natural things. They tend to move. If you're working with modern materials like fire bricks and refractory for your kiln, it won't really be a problem. But for us, it's something that we need to be on top of to prevent any catastrophic failures during the actual firing. And those repairs will need time to dry, and this extended period of rain where we can't use the furnace is the perfect time for that to happen. So let me explain to you what's happened with the furnace that we're building, and I'll show you what we have to do to fix it. So the cracks that we mentioned last time have pretty much stabilized to where they're going to be, but this one in particular grew to be about 5 millimeters across, which is, it actually stops just inside here, so it doesn't go all the way through, which is really good news, and it means that it's not catastrophic. And also the edges are still very, very clean and not crumbly, which is also very good. But you can see why they're happening if the sun is going to let me focus. Do you see that? That's the top of our sapling frame. And it gives you an idea of how much this has moved, because I packed about 3 inches of clay on top of that sapling frame. And now it's just under the surface and actually poking up through, which means this is compressed quite a bit. So the way that these cracks have formed is actually a good thing. It indicates positive things, even though it's a sucky thing to have to deal with. The fact that the clay isn't crumbling and that it's really clean and still very plastic shows that this is not a failure of the clay. The clay is actually doing its job perfectly. What's happened is given away when you look directly down the top, because remember how we saw that the top of the skeleton, the green sapling, poking through? If you actually remember where our saplings were, all of the major cracking is happening in line, vertically in line with our vertical saplings. And given how much the entire thing has shrunk through compression, what's happened is that those green saplings are drying and shrinking. And when they shrink, they pull away from the clay which would have bonded to it originally, and that leads to the cracking, which means that the repair is really easy to do. So all we have to do, and here's a visual for you, that's what the cracks look like now. They are triangular and they go inwards like a V. And in the middle, because of the way it's separated open and because of all of our organic matter and things that are mixed in with the clay, it's all full of junk in there. We need to scrape out the bottom of them to change it from a V into sort of like a U shape. So we're going to build a simple tool that we can use to clean out these cracks, and then once we've done that, we will make up a little bit more of our clay mixture, and we will create essentially wedges of this clay and slot it in there and compress it so that it fills those grooves. Because once again, what's happened is we formed a ring, and that ring has shrunk. You saw how much it moved vertically. It's also moving that way around its circumference. And when it shrinks, it's only got so much material. So it's shrinking and pulling apart from itself. And the most natural places it's going to pull apart is in line with our saplings, which leads to these cracks. Since the cracks don't go all the way through to the inside, that's a really good sign. It means that our clay material is actually really, really good. And of course, it's going to crack more on the outside, the larger circumference, than it's going to do on the inside. So once we actually scrape out and fill these large cracks, it will stabilize our foundry and make it even stronger than it was before. So let's make this tool. A crack repair tool is actually quite quite simple to make. Let me see if I can get it to stay focused. So something to hold, the angle is good to reach, and this claw can be dragged in and scraped to clean out the bottom of the crack. And the tip, you'll notice, is got a slight taper inwards, about 3 millimeters at the bottom, about 5 millimeters, or as wide as the crack goes to on the outside. If we have to, we can move it side to side to widen the crack, but this gives us good leverage to very gently scrape out the inside. And it's as simple as just working it in. And you see how the clay is just not crumbling as I do this? It's staying really clean on the sides. That just goes to show this is not a structural crack. This is literally just settling and expansion. Now that the worst of the cracks have been opened up nice and wide, you notice they're much wider now that they've been scraped out and they've got square bottoms. We're going to make wedges of clay, wet the inside, sprinkle a bit of water in there, and then work in our clay wedges, making sure to compact them nice and tight. I'm trying so hard to show you this process, but it's the sun is making it very difficult to film. So here you can see we've used our tool and we've scraped out the inside of that crack. We just want to put a little bit of moisture in there just to activate the clay. And then you want to take our mix, and the first thing we want to do is to try and pack it down in there. You'll find if you do half the crack first, it will work a bit better. And with half of it in there, you can use the back of the tool to follow the crack, and that will push that layer of clay down in. And then we do it again. Back of our tool, you can see it doesn't go down as far this time. And then this time we can just push it over. And we just do that the whole way. Pushing it down in is essential, otherwise you're just putting a band-aid on it. And we don't want band-aid fixes, we want a solid forge again, or foundry. The smaller ones that you see, you can just throw, the smaller ends I mean. Most of this sort of crack, you would just want to leave that. It's part of the drying process and it's natural, it's not going to form problems, especially at this point in the drying cycle. If after 10 days that hasn't widened, it's not going to widen. And then, if you sort of firmly rub it, you can see there's still a little bit of an indentation there. It just means there's still a little bit of room for some more clay. And the next time I do it, it's gone. Like it never happened. And that's it, just do that for the whole thing. And just like that, it looks back to normal again. So this isn't just a band-aid fix where we've just put fresh clay on the top. No, we've actually full on cleaned out the bottom of those cracks, squared it off, and then worked clay all the way back down in there. Now this had fully settled, which means there shouldn't be too much more movement left in this, although that will change due to humidity and such, especially with the humidity and temperature shifts that are going to be coming for me with the coming rain. But this will drastically minimize the amount of future cracking that we're likely to see. You'll notice that all of the superficial cracks I've left untouched. I want to put as little new moisture in this as I can as part of this process, but this should drastically increase the final strength of the foundry. You know, I'd love to say that I did all this deliberately so that this was a good opportunity for you to learn, but this is just the nature of working with natural materials, unfortunately. So in the end, it kind of worked out well because we're delayed by another week to 10 days because of the rain that's coming. And we have to think ahead in several days when it comes to actually firing this because the firing process, the pre-fire process that's going to ceramify the inside of the foundry takes 2 days, sometimes 3 days, and then you've got to plan your smelt after that. So even though the weather's great now, this is the calm before the storm. And this has actually turned into a perfect opportunity for me to be able to have these cracks be at a point where they're concerning, show you exactly what that looks like, how to prepare them for repair, and then how to do the repair. It's pretty straightforward work, but it's painstaking. You've got to make sure that each one of those cracks is squared off nicely with smooth walls, and then you pack that final clay all the way down from the bottom to the top. And we get to actually see how these repairs hold, because this thing will continue to settle a little bit more in the time that it has, although I would say that a good 80%, 85% of its settling that it's going to do has already happened in the last 9-10 days that it's been air drying. So it's going to be exposed to temperature shifts, humidity shifts, and things like that. So it'll be a really good test of how well those repairs work. And it'll also show us if there's any more settling that needs to occur, because if we were to fire it early, any residual settling is going to happen much, much faster in the process of thermal shock, and we don't want that. So while this is something that's a bit sucky to deal with, this is part of it. Back in medieval times, when they were depending on these things, they didn't have the luxury of just starting again or going to the shop and getting fire brick and castable refractory. They had to just make do with what they had and fix it as they went. So this actually gives you an insight into what people would have had to deal with in history, and you can see how a very simple wooden tool and a little bit of elbow grease is able to completely resolve that problem. So as part of this episode, since the repair process is pretty short and there's not much going on for the next week, I thought I'd do a little bit of a Q&A on some of the questions that I've been getting regularly, because many of you don't seem to want to ask the questions in the video comments. You want to send me DMs. So probably the most common question I've been getting is pertaining to like why I'm doing it the way that I am, various comments about that. There are modern materials that would make this process a lot easier. I could use a steel drum and line it with isowool and refractory. I could use fire brick and castable. I could make bricks instead of doing it the way I'm doing it. All of these things. The reason that I wanted to show it to you this way is because of that fact that I talked about in an earlier episode, how this is more or less the way it was done for 3,000 years, almost. That's wild to think of, absolutely wild to think of. And so I wanted to show you that this is not a particularly complicated, scary process, because everybody seems to think that it is. And I think it's because it's kind of shrouded in mystery, and I wanted this series to fix that. So I wanted to deliberately show you how you can do this with found materials only. and not have to go to a store to buy anything. You could literally find this ironstone, you can dig this clay, you can collect the sand and straw, and you can make the ash, you can make the charcoal if you want to, and you can make iron the way that they did for thousands of years without having to resort to all these high-tech contraptions and building blast furnaces and things like that. You can just do this. And I wanted you to feel empowered to be able to do this. And so I figured when I show you how to do it, I show you how to do it in the simplest, most primitive way I can think of, short of making an old-fashioned bellows, then it might encourage you to give it a try, because I think people should give this a try. I know it's kind of a little bit wanky to say it like this, but the world has become focused on convenience, and convenience is inversely proportional to understanding. The more convenient a thing is, the less you have to understand it, because it's just sorted out for you. So if you have the ability to, using just your own sweat and effort, make your own iron from the ground, that's empowering, and it shows you that you can just do anything. The next question that comes up commonly is, won't I melt the tuya, the steel pipe that's going in there. So I wanted to clarify a few things about that. One, the end of it is going to get messed up. That's just how it happens. However, it will continuously have cool outside air blowing through it. And it is 2mm wall thickness, so it will absolutely survive this smelt just fine. It may even do up to 2 or 3 smelts. It's also, I've got quite a long piece of pipe, and so I can dock the charred end off of it each time I use it. Although I may just do the one smelt. I'd like to do more, but I may just be doing the one. So for this purpose, it will work just fine. But I wanted to point out that in a historical context, a tuya pipe in a foundry like this was considered a consumable item. Sometimes they were literally made of clay. Sometimes they were made of wrought iron. Sometimes they were made of copper. And some of the fancier ones were made of copper and hollow, and they would put water inside the walls of the tuya so that it carried the heat away. Even modern blast furnaces, the really high-tech modern ones, use copper tuyas, and I think there's something poetic about that they still do that. And it's because copper is just so beautifully thermally conductive that it doesn't want to wear away. The fact that I'm using a steel pipe is one of the most basic ways to do it, rather short of making my own clay pipe. And it's fine. It'll work just fine. It will be in an environment that is at forge welding temperatures, yes. And it will be there for an extended period, yes. And that will cause deterioration of the end of that pipe, yes. But it will survive this firing and possibly 1 or 2 more. You don't want the end of your tuya to widen or to like rot away or burn away holes in the side so that the airflow gets kind of funky. You want it to always be going where you want it to be, but other than that, it will easily survive 8-hour firing. Another topic that gets a lot of questions, that all of the different questions about it can be answered with the same explanation. A lot of people assume that what we're doing is liquefying. We're melting the ore, and that's how we're getting the iron. That's not actually what's happening in a bloomery furnace. In a blast furnace you are, but not in a bloomery furnace. It works very differently, and it's kind of cool. So rust is oxygenated iron, essentially, or oxidized iron. So the iron molecules have oxygen molecules attached to them, and depending on the combination of how many oxygen molecules and how many iron molecules, you can get magnetite or hematite or siderite or any of the various other iron oxides that are in our ore. So what we're doing is we're exposing the ore, these iron oxides, to an environment where oxygen is being burned very, very readily. And you may know this by its term, a reducing atmosphere. If you've done forge welding in a gas forge, you want to try and make a reducing atmosphere, and that's where you get the dragon's breath flame, because the flame has to exit the forge in order to be able to have enough oxygen to burn visibly. And that's how you know that you're at, the dragon's breath is how you know you're in a reducing atmosphere. We need to create a reducing atmosphere in our smelter, because the reducing atmosphere will look for oxygen to burn desperately. And it will find, the only place it will be able to find that oxygen is the oxygen atoms that are, or molecules, whatever, that are attached to the oxides, the iron oxides. And if you have an iron oxide and you remove the oxygen, all you're left with is iron. So that's what we're doing. And that is a process called reduction. And so the ore will never actually liquefy. The gangue, that it's called gangue, the stuff that's not iron oxides in the ore, the other bits of limestone and quartz and clay and other stuff that's in there, that's called gangue. The gangue will liquefy and drip down through and form a puddle at the bottom, and that stuff is called slag. Slag is basically the stuff you don't want. And the more slag that forms that doesn't have iron in it, the more it's going to pull impurities out of the iron as it forms. So because you never liquefy the iron, how does it go through the forge or the foundry? So as the charcoal burns, the amount of charcoal in the foundry is going to go down, and we're going to be constantly putting charcoal in at the top, but every so often we're going to put a layer of ore, and that layer of ore is actually going to be about 3 inches thick. You don't want to put like a light dusting of ore if you've got good quality ore like we've got. If you've got questionable quality ore, you don't put as much in. But if you've got good, proven quality ore, you'll put a layer that's like 2 or 3 inches thick that coats the entire inside volume on like a disc on the bed of charcoal, and then you'll cover that with charcoal. And that ore will move down as the charcoal burns. And as the charcoal burns, gas permeability allows the burning, reducing atmosphere to flow in, through, and over that ore that's going to be reducing the iron oxides into iron. Now, the gangue will liquefy and melt away as slag, but the iron won't fully liquefy. It will go up to a temperature where it will do a thing called sintering, where it is hot enough to forge weld, essentially. And it's very similar to what we do with forge welding as blacksmiths. So iron molecules, when they are at sintering temperatures, get very sticky, and they like to stick to each other. And so as that iron forms, a mass of iron that you get will sort of congregate and build up on that little dome that we created at the bottom of the foundry. And that will, because of the way the gas is moving around, it will form a ball-like structure until it eventually runs out of iron, and then we let it burn down. So at no point do we ever liquefy the iron. We just sort of make it get goopy and sticky as it sinters together, and we try and liquefy everything that's not iron. Interestingly, a lot of the questions that I've been getting have been around the ore source. It seems that most people thought that iron sand was the only way you could get iron ore for this sort of thing. And it's most likely because I imagine most people's exposure to this sort of thing, a bloomery process, would be through the Japanese tatara method, which is how they make the steel for samurai swords, which is fine. It's just that's a very different process, rooted in quite significant tradition, and I don't really have enough expertise in that to be able to speak confidently about it. But what I can tell you is that iron sand is plentiful in Japan, and so that was the ore source that was used. And then tatara is like a sarcophagus-sized bloomery foundry. So the one we're using is only a 30-centimeter circle on the inside, like a foot across, whereas a tatara is huge. A couple of people could lie down inside of one and have room to spare. You can have a tea party inside one. And it's fed through multiple bellows. The process also takes days. And they have such a controlled airflow that they can actually put iron sand in as is, essentially. They just sort of sprinkle it in, and they keep putting in charges every 10, 15 minutes sometimes, over and over again, because they are not creating a bloom the way that we are. We are creating essentially a wrought iron bloom. It's just the bloom that we make is going to be about as bad a quality wrought iron as possible, and then we refine it to make it better and better quality. Whereas the Japanese tatara method makes a sort of an iron-rich slag mix at the bottom, which is then sorted into various different carbon contents, which are used for the different parts of the sword. And those pieces are sort of flattened down and stacked up by being coated in straw and clay and forge welded together. It's a beautiful process to watch, but it's not the only way to do it. And I think the exposure to tatara as the main exposure for iron sand being used has led to a lot of people thinking that if you are building a bloomery like we're doing, the way to charge iron sand into it is to pour the iron sand in the top. And it's not a great way to do it. If you want to produce a good bloom at the end of it, there's a different way to do it. And we know this because other cultures only had iron sand accessible as their ore source, and they didn't do it the way that tatara does it. And so what they would do, we still need to roast iron sand, just like we did our iron ore, because of exactly the same reason. There's a lot of trapped iron oxides in there that benefit from having the impurities burnt off. And the extra oxygen, extra moisture and things like that. Separation via a magnet is also good. However, if you add a powdered substance to your bloomery, it's so narrow inside there that you will choke it up. And choking it up, even just partially choking it up, affects the airflow. So what other cultures would do is they would mix their iron sand with clay by about 5% by weight. And they would make pellets that were about walnut sized, just like we did with our ironstone. And those pellets would then be roasted, just like our ironstone, and be added in. But whereas we're going to be adding in like a 3-inch to 4-inch layer at a time with our ironstone, iron sand works a little differently. So you want thinner layers, more like 1.5 to 2-inch layers, and that's how you work out your weight. So it's the diameter of the circle of the inside of the foundry, and then the thickness of that layer is going to depend on the quality of your ore. And iron sand is lower quality a lot of the time to what you find in raw ore that's been taken out of the ground, or even good quality ironstone. It's not better quality than poor quality ironstone though. So if you're lucky enough and you get good ironstone, that's a really good ore source. And we've been very spoiled with our setup compared to what it can be with ironstone. So I just happen to live in a very iron-rich part of the world, which is just lucky for me. But you really need those pellets, the inch-sized pellets of your iron sand. I think they call it agglomeration to bring it together. Although some cultures would fill like a pan with the iron sand that's been slightly moistened and then heat it until it kind of sinters together, and then break it up to make these pellets. But pellets you must make, and you add them into your foundry that way. So that's a totally viable ore source and method, but I don't have iron sand because I live in Tasmania. There are multiple ways to get iron. There's bog iron, there's actual ore from iron veins that are deep underground, there's ironstone, there's iron sand, and all of them have different grades, different qualities, different gangs mixed in with them and things that all need to be processed. None of it is as simple as just walking to the beach with a magnet, picking things up. Especially since you saw that most iron oxides are very weakly magnetic, if at all, until you purify and roast them, and then they become noticeably magnetic. So if you're only relying on magnetic materials, you're actually missing a lot of ore that's out there. So hopefully that answers a few questions. And with that, we just leave it to dry. So we've introduced moisture again, and it's going to get its chance to properly dry, which is good. I guarantee you those cracks will reopen because they are now natural weak points, and as it moves and shrinks with changes in temperature and humidity over the coming days, that's where it's going to relieve that pressure changes. And so the thing we want to watch for is that they only open up to little thin hairline cracks, like I showed you on the rest of it. Those little thin hairline cracks are just part of working with clay. Seeing those, that's fine. There's nothing structurally wrong with those at all. It's just aesthetically displeasing. But it's not showing a weak point in your clay. And given how well it took those repairs, the clay is intact very well anyway. So we've just now added in the clay that it needed to be able to hold its settled shape. And if little hairline cracks appear where the big ones used to be, it's nothing to worry about whatsoever. So it'll take days before we actually know how the repairs went. If it's not particularly good, we can actually do the same process again. If you're continually adding clay, eventually you will hit a homeostasis point where everything just gels. Just is a matter of how many times you need to do it. But it's now been several hours as of filming this, several hours since I filled those in, and the temperature has changed drastically because it was in full sun and now it's in full shade, and it's a chilly evening. So it's gone through a big temperature swing, and the humidity's going up, so it's gone through a big moisture swing, and all I'm seeing is some very faint hairline cracks where those massive ones used to be. So that's a really good sign. So with the onset of the bad weather, that's going to delay the smelt itself. So the next video you see from me will be after the weather event, when we actually do the pre-fire on this thing to turn it into a ceramic. Take it from clay into a basically porcelain, I guess you'd call it. And yeah, that'll be the next stage, and that'll be the last stage before we actually do the smelt. So there'll be this video, then the next video, which will be our theory video that I told you about, and then there'll be the smelt. So I will see you guys on that next video. Thanks again to my Patreon supporters for helping out with their contributions to this build. It makes a big difference. And big thanks to Kevin, the legend, who booked this whole monstrosity to happen. I'll see you guys on the next video. Hope you're enjoying it. Hope you're staying well. Catch you later.